Stipciato, BOEMQE8, SUX5G, SI equals 2 Exhibigured Shaldand herself. She uttered her final prayer. To Jesus Christ, I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul. Her ladies-in-waiting, standing nearby, wept quietly. The executioner, standing behind her, was ready. His sword was concealed, awaiting the moment to strike. I am come hither to die, Anne Boleyn began on the morning of May 19, 1536. These words, spoken atop the scaffold erected within the Tower of London, were not only the final words of a queen, but the culmination of a carefully orchestrated performance. Anne's execution was a moment that would forever change the course of history. But what is often overlooked is the fact that her final address, delivered with grace and composure, was not the speech she had originally intended to make. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII and the first English queen to be executed, was accused of adultery, incest, and high treason. The charges, as nearly all modern historians would argue, were politically motivated and grossly fabricated. Henry's desire for a male heir, coupled with his shifting affections, made Anne's position vulnerable. Accused of a variety of sexual misconducts, including an incestuous affair with her brother, her fate was sealed in a court that had already decided her guilt. Anne was no longer the queen who had once captured the heart of a king. She was a pawn in a political game yet. As she stood on the scaffold, poised for death, Anne did not protest her innocence. Instead, she delivered a restrained speech, praising the king as a gentle and sovereign lord, and asking those present to pray for her soul. Her silence, however, was not born out of guilt or fear. In fact, Anne Boleyn had prepared an entirely different speech, one that addressed her wrongful imprisonment and asserted her unwavering faith and innocence. Unfortunately, she was not allowed to deliver it. Tudor protocol demanded that condemned prisoners refrain from making public statements that could inflame popular sentiment or cast doubt on the monarch's judgment. Anne was aware that she was being watched, controlled even in her final moments. William Kingston, Constable of the Tower, recorded Anne's mental clarity during her last days, recounting how Anne had sent for him the morning of her execution. She said she would like to have some word to speak, but would not offend his grace. He wrote, "It is clear from this that Anne understood the nature of her situation. Her death was not to be a moment of justice, but a performance one that would be controlled to serve the crown's image. The scaffold itself was an instrument of control, designed not for justice, but to reinforce the power of the monarch." Anne's silencing was a reflection of her lack of agency, even in her final moments. Her composed and dignified appearance on the scaffold was not just an act of grace, but also a carefully choreographed performance, one that would serve Henry VIII's political agenda. The truth of Anne's thoughts, what she truly wanted to express, remains buried beneath this public image, and perhaps the words she was not allowed to speak echo louder through history than those she did. Anne's execution, then, was not merely the tragic end of a queen, but a calculated political maneuver. The events leading up to her death were meticulously managed. From the charges against her to the timing of her final moments, Henry VIII needed not only Anne's death, but her compliance in that death. In a sense, Anne was forced to play her final role for the benefit of the monarchy, silencing any opposition or doubts about the legitimacy of her execution. And though she faced her end with apparent composure, the performance that the crown demanded was one of chilling precision. In the early hours of May 19, 1536, the Tower of London was a silent and tense place. The sun had just risen, casting a pale light across the green lawn near the White Tower. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, spent her final moments in the Queen's lodgings, once a space filled with riches and grandeur, now cold and silent. The Queen, who had once been the most powerful woman in England, had already confessed her sins and received the sacrament. She had prepared herself for death, but did not yet know the exact moment when it would come. Anne had already experienced one delay. On the previous day, May 18th, she had been informed that her execution had been postponed. The delay was not due to any logistical reason, but was, in fact, a psychological maneuver. As Sir William Kingston recorded, Anne was deeply agitated by the delay. She had hoped to face her end with dignity, but now every passing hour seemed to intensify her anxiety. It was a tactic designed to unnerve her, to heighten the drama surrounding the spectacle of her death. At around 9 a.m., Anne was escorted to the scaffold. She wore a gray damask gown over a crimson kirtle, the red symbolizing martyrdom in the Catholic tradition. Her headdress was simple, and her hair was tied back. Exposing her neck, the crowd gathered around her, a small, select group of nobles, officials, and a few citizens. The public was kept at a distance. This was not meant to be a chaotic scene, but a controlled execution. There was no room for emotion or passion here, only the cold efficiency of statecraft. As Anne ascended the scaffold, she did so with a poise that belied the gravity of the situation. Eyewitness accounts describe her as moving with resigned dignity. She addressed the crowd, calmly acknowledging her fate without protest. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die for, according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never." Anne made no protest of her innocence. To do so would have been seen as a defiant act, one that could have cast doubt on Henry VIII's judgment. By submitting to her fate without question and ensured that her execution would proceed according to the script that had been written for her, her final moments, though, were not free of tension. As she knelt and blindfolded herself, she uttered her final prayer. "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul." Her ladies-in-waiting, standing nearby, wept quietly. The executioner, standing behind her, was ready. His sword was concealed, awaiting the moment to as Anne Boleyn knelt before her executioner. The presence of a foreign swordsman added another layer of complexity to the events surrounding her death. In Tudor England, executions were typically carried out by axe, a method that was often brutal and imprecise. But Henry VIII had made an extraordinary decision. He summoned a French executioner from Calais, a town under English control at the time. This man, often identified in historical sources as Jean Rambeau, was known as a master swordsman, skilled in the swift, precise decapitation technique used in France for noble executions. The French method was far cleaner and more dignified than the axe, and Henry VIII likely hoped that it would add an air of refinement to the event. But the choice of the sword was not made out of mercy. It was symbolic. Henry needed to distance himself from the brutality of Anne's death. He had already torn apart his kingdom. For her, he had annulled his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, broken with the Catholic Church, and established the Church of England all for the chance to marry Anne. Now, with her execution, Henry was keen to maintain the appearance of mercy, even while carrying out the deed. The executioner, who was paid a handsome sum of £23 6 South 8 da fortune for the time, had been practicing his craft in the Tower's courtyard for days. He was prepared not only to perform his duty, but to do so with perfect precision. Anne, aware of the spectacle around her, reportedly remarked before her death, "I heard say the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck." Her words, tinged with gallows humor, revealed her acute awareness of the drama being staged around her. She knew that her death, though inevitable, would be a performance, a final act on the stage of political power. As Anne knelt on the scaffold, the silence of the moment was deafening. The crowd stood still, holding their breath, and asked the executioner, "Shall I say my prayers now?" She had a moment of uncertainty, unsure when the final blow would fall. The executioner, sword in hand, called out for the blade. As Anne turned her head instinctively, the sword struck with terrifying precision. The execution was over in less than 45 seconds. No sound followed but the rustling of clothing and the muffled sobs of those watching. The Queen, once the most powerful woman in England, had fallen, her life extinguished in an instant. Her body was hurriedly placed in an arrow chest, and there was no grand ceremony to mark her passing. No royal procession, no final farewell. Instead, Anne's remains were buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, without fanfare or tribute. Her death, though swift, was not an act of mercy. It was a calculated political ritual, designed to maintain the crown's power and legitimacy. The execution day, the swift yet calculated end of a queen. The execution of Anne Boleyn, in its chilling efficiency, was a reminder of the nature of Tudor politics, where power, ambition, and ruthlessness converged. The details surrounding her death reveal how fear sharpens the blade of power. Her execution was not a mere punishment. It was an instrument of statecraft. Henry VIII needed Anne's death, but he also needed her compliance in it. He required not just her body, but her silence, her submission to the forces that had orchestrated her demise. Anne Boleyn's final moments were, in many ways, a performance for the masses, one designed to reinforce the power of the monarchy and quell any doubt about Henry VIII's authority. Her fate had been sealed long before the sword fell. She had been condemned not only by the court, but by the very political machinery that had once elevated her to queen. In the end, her execution was not just about hurt, was about what her death represented: the fragility of power, the dangers of ambition, and the lengths to which a monarch would go to maintain control. Anne's calm acceptance of her fate, her dignified silence, and her final prayer all contributed to the image of a queen who had faced her end with grace. But behind the veneer of dignity was the harsh reality of political expediency. Her execution was not an act of justice. It was a political sacrifice. It was a message to anyone who might challenge the power of the monarchy. Even the queen could fall when statecraft demanded it. In the days following her death, Anne Boleyn's legacy became the subject of much debate. Some saw her as a martyr, a woman who had been unjustly condemned by a monarch driven by personal desires. Others viewed her as a victim of political machinations, her death a necessary sacrifice in the pursuit of power. But what is certain is that her execution changed the course of history. It marked the end of one chapter in England's tumultuous political history and the beginning of another. Anne Boleyn's death was the ultimate testament to the precariousness of power. A woman who had once been the queen, who had borne the king's hopes for a male heir, was reduced to a symbol of political manipulation. Her fate serves as a reminder that in the world of Tudor politics, no one was truly safe, not even the queen. As the witnesses left the Tower that day, the silence that followed Anne's death was deafening. Her last words, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul," were not just a plea for divine mercy. They were a final assertion of her faith. A declaration that, in the end, she would stand before God, not the king, to answer for her actions. The truth of her life, her love for Henry, her sacrifices, and her innocence, likely silenced by the political forces around her, remains buried beneath the surface of history. Anne Boleyn's execution may have been swift, but it was not without significance. It was a reminder that even the most powerful can fall, and that ambition, once unleashed, can fracture the very institutions it seeks to protect. Her fate remains a stark warning to anyone who dares to challenge the might of the crown. The line between glory and doom can be severed in a single stroke. And Anne's life, like her death, serves as a powerful reminder of the ruthlessness that lies at the heart of power.